A very warm welcome to all of our viewers and listeners to another Debating Europe's Experts panel. Today, we're going to be talking about internet safety. 20 years after the first Internet Safety Day was introduced. And here we are, live from the European Parliament. My name is Dharmendra Kanani. I am Chief Spokesperson with Friends of Europe and the Chief Operating Officer and your moderator for this panel's discussion. As ever, for Debating Europe, we try and ensure that we bring you a multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary approach to the issue that we're going to be debating here from the Parliament. Internet safety is a major issue for all of us, and those of us, and all of us, were transformed into online lives during COVID, and we were, if you like, nudged and forced to conduct our daily lives online. But just like anything else, the net has brought great good. It's been a force for good, but it's also been a force for bad and harm. Here today, we're going to be talking about net safety, and I'm joined by a fabulous panel of speakers. Firstly, we have Billy Kelleher, who's MEP at the European Parliament. I have Karen Massin with me from Google, who's Head of Strategy and Policy. I have Andrea, who is a tech geek and working with a think tank here in Europe. And then I have Piers Donoghue, who is, let's say, our senior civil servant from DG Connect from the European Commission. So the format is thus. We have a range of questions. We have 6.5 million users who come onto our platform. And what we've done is glean and harvest a few questions from them. And so the format is I will ask each of our speakers a question, and then we'll hopefully get the debate going, and let's see what happens, and hopefully a little bit of controversy. They may disagree with each other, but let's see. So firstly, I'm going to ask our resident MEP. Thank you very much for joining us on the panel, Billy. We have a question from Wasim, and Wasim says, do you think the internet is safe today? What do we mean by a safer internet, and to what extent can it be made safer? Big question.
Yes, a big question. Look, it's vast. I mean, it accesses the entire globe. I mean, people are on it all the time. Their lives are now being lived through it. Is it safe? There's two issues I would say. Firstly, the individual can be very vulnerable in the sense that, theft of an individual's data, equally phishing, cyber scams, the usual crimes that can happen on a daily basis. And then broadening it out beyond that, the whole issue of disinformation, misinformation, and then, these big potential cyber attacks that happen from time to time. We had it in Ireland, in the HSE, for example, which had a catastrophic effect on the ability to deliver services to citizens. So, I mean, there are inherent threats there. And as we become more interconnected, those threats increase. And as we all become more dependent on the internet, well, then we are significantly exposed.
So, Billy, are we safe today or not?
Well, I don't think we can accept that what we have now is suitable or fit for purpose, because the individual is under threat from even in the context of bullying right through to phishing scams, cyber scams, just the predators online. So you have those at an individual basis. And then on top of that, cyber security is a significant threat to institutions, financial services, and, broader administrations of governments, etc. So it's not safe from that perspective, but we can put measures in place to ensure that happens.
Okay, let's come back to you on that, because you're an MEP, so therefore you have accountability for laws, regulations, and keeping us safe in a way.
Yes.
I know it's a cross-party thing, but it's important. So let me come back to you on that point for a moment. Andrea, you're a policy analyst, a digital analyst, working in a prominent think tank here in Brussels. What's your sense of safety? Where are we?
Well, I think that I'm going to try to build on what Billy said before, because I think there is a big difference between safety and security. And when we're speaking about internet safety, we tend to think more about, is it safe for users, regardless of the level of skills to use it? As of now, not completely, as he said, but is the internet secure as of now? When we speak about security we tend to think a little bit more about, is the infrastructure that we're using now doing what it's supposed to be doing? And I think that in that sense, we're not yet ready. So I think that this question can be thought into different ways. Plus, just to respond to the other half, how we can make it secure. I think there is not a perfect recipe, but I would say that if we think of what is happening nowadays, there's 4 different points that I would like to mention just to start the debate. The first one is, do we have the right regulatory framework in place? We're trying. Okay. The second, do we have the right investments in place? There is an investment gap of 2 billion euros in cybersecurity only in Europe. So I think we should do a little bit more on that. Do we have the right skills and awareness? Is the people aware of how to use the internet in a safe way? Okay. I think we're advancing on that. And the last point, and I will shut up right now, is international collaboration. How do we make that these threats are like constantly like bombing us in a way. Like, how do we mitigate those and reduce those by engaging with our allies and partners?
Okay, I get a sense, Wasim, if you're listening, I hope you are. You're thinking they're not answering my question. So let's move on to our, as I said, our resident civil servant. Piers, thank you. I'm sorry for calling you our resident civil servant, but you are director for the Future Network, DG Connect. I mean, that's a fantastic title.
Sounds great.
I know. What's your answer to the question? Are we safe today?
I don't think anyone would pretend that we are safe in today's environment, and what's more, the threats keep evolving. So we're always going to be trying to improve the situation and actually catch up with those who want to do harm. I really do think it's important for us to get our efforts right, that we do differentiate between the security, that's mostly the infrastructure, whether devices, systems can be hacked, and safety, that's the user, particularly online. Is that person safe? And here again, I'm afraid, to Wasim, it's not an easy answer, because it depends on the vulnerability of the individual. It depends on the vulnerability of the organization, whether it's an SME, or whether it is a very large government institution or company. So for that reason, we have to say it's not as safe as we want it, but we owe it to ourselves to keep working on this and working together. So the international cooperation is essential. A lot of what we do is on the first two issues, but therefore I would agree that the one that we actually can be criticized on is in relation to digital skills and making the users aware and able, with the support of what we're putting in place, to protect themselves as well.
Thank you very much. Karen, can I turn to you? You're at Google, a household brand in everyone's house and on everyone's hands, it is in the nicest way, the phones, etc. Answer Wasim's question, how safe are we? Or is it safe? Is the internet safe?
Well, I think we need to keep on doing better. And I think, as you know, as you were saying, Piers, I mean, the threats are expanding all the time. So we need to constantly, basically, on the front foot to actually come up with what is going to be next. But if we take an example, I mean, there is, to talk about safety, there is like 100 million phishing, cases every day. So, I mean, it's about how you actually prevent that from, happening to the people. And also, cybersecurity threats, because what we see, as you're saying, is that the weakest links is the people. The bad actors, when they want to attack companies, organizations, they go through the people who, by mistake, click on something or access something which is going to be problematic. And so how we actually empower these people, how we protect these people from the beginning with the infrastructure, so bumping up the infrastructure, bumping up the skills, but also bumping up, the software and the tools like the cloud so that nothing comes to them. So that's basically that's why we have to work together to actually make it happen.
So imagine we've got our viewers and listeners and they're thinking, how safe is the internet here today? From 0 to 10, are we at 5, 8, or are we towards 9?
Oh, God.
I know.
That's a fortune teller
It is.
question. Well, I think it is safer than it was before. And so I would put into the 50% top. I mean, is that a fair answer?
Okay, Andrea?
I would go for a 7, 7.5.
7?
Interesting.
You call me the civil servant, so I'm going to play the bureaucrat card and refuse to give that answer. It's much too complex.
Indeed, I expected that. How about you?
Well, as a politician, I certainly wouldn't like to put a figure on it because I think there's two things. Firstly, the individual, I think, is still, if they're vulnerable, is very unsafe. And I believe that we have an awful lot of work to do with that. In the area of bullying, for example, at school level right through, these are significant issues. And then on the other end of the scale, we have situations where we have, state actors hacking infrastructure. We saw it in the colonial pipeline in the United States of America. We're seeing it in the context of the electricity systems in Ukraine, previous to the invasion. So those two extremes are certainly far from safe. Everyday use, is okay, but when there's nefarious actors or individuals who want to damage somebody, it is still unsafe, in my view.
Okay, let's build on that question. We've got Maria. Maria says, a secure internet is to talk with others without someone knowing what you are saying, what we are saying. It's to use my credit card without it being stolen and stuff like that. Is this the right way to think about safer internet? So as a politician, so build on that question that I was going to ask you earlier on, is that what are you going to do to make the internet a safer place?
Well,
as a politician here?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of obligations on politicians. First and foremost, we'll just say in the examples of payment systems, banking institutions, finance houses, that there's obligations on them to put robust systems in place around cybersecurity. And that should percolate right down to the individual level then as well. And there has to be sanctions as well. I mean, like if we keep just asking companies to do things And if they don't, and there's no sanction, well then, you're really only depending on goodwill. So I think that regulators have to be in place, and there has to be sanction available as well to them in the event of large companies breaching obligations or not implementing obligations. And so the Digital Operation Resilience Act, for example, in financial services is now in place. It's a significant regulation that forces banks and forces insurance companies and any other regulated entities in Europe to have systems in place. And if they don't, they're actually in breach and there can be sanctions. So regulators must also enforce or have the ability to enforce rather than just, asking companies to do that. And then there is the obligation on companies themselves to come forward with solutions. I know they do, but at the same time, there's sometimes an absolving of responsibility. Well, that is a matter for the internet. It's also for a matter of the companies that are underpinning the internet and accessibility as well.
Okay, Karen, I'll come to you in a moment first, because I take your point, but having moderated many debates and spoken to big tech companies, and they said, we're not responsible for public service, we're not responsible for ensuring there's no public harm, it's the role of government, but they should be leading us rather than us leading government. But let's come back to that debate in a moment. Andrea, answer the question about what do you think, how do we think about a safer internet? Is what Maria's saying how we should think about a safer internet?
I think that refers to safe applications, which is a different way of thinking of safe internet. As I mentioned before, to me, safety, it's one thing that comes with security in itself. So you cannot think about a safe space if what we are having, the infrastructure we're having, is not secure enough. So I would understand that from a user perspective, knowing that you have that reliability on the services that you're trying to use or that you're purchasing somehow is how you would define safety. But at the end of the day, it goes a little bit more beyond that. You can be using a service that is that works really well, but it can be sucking your data, and that data can be used to do other things, right? So should we consider that as part of safety? I think there should be a compromise, and what we're using is something that is giving us what we basically want from that, but also what we are given to that, it should be used in a good way. I don't know if I'm just explaining myself and trying to make it really brief, but I think that
but
we
is that
cannot
we've both got rights and
It goes both
responsibilities
ways.
as a consumer and someone that actually
and
accesses
service providers and regulators, and trying to create the right framework. I think it's a full structure, so you cannot measure safety just based on, okay, I'm going to pay with my credit card and fine, I'm given that plays the money, therefore everything is working well.
Yeah, but Andrea, you also know there are hundreds and millions of people who have very poor digital literacy at both ends of the spectrum, at older stage and younger stage. People like you all over the world who have just got a smartphone and are accessing stuff, but have no idea about how their data, etc., is being manipulated and made monetized. Piers, can I come to you in terms of that what Maria says? Is this how we should think about a safer internet, or a safer internet? About the phone calls, the transactions, the kind of what she's alluding to, I think, is just the way we live our lives.
No, I don't think so. It's not wrong. It's just it's only one part of the problem. I mean, we're talking there about the security of transactions. Now, maybe that's not the right word, but from a conversation to a financial transaction. And of course, we have done a lot in the European Union to try and put in place the tools to prevent hacking, also to prevent counterfeit behaviour. But it's not enough. You mentioned, and I think everyone has mentioned the training, but we do actually have to look at the safer internet from the point of view of the vulnerable groups that you've mentioned. One of the oldest actions that the European Union has taken is the safer internet for kids, or better internet for kids, because it's all very well to say that you have a safe transaction, but what if you can't be sure that the person that the child is conversing with on the other end is not the person that they think it is? It's not a safe conversation. What if through the simple traffic monitoring that takes place, an algorithm can identify that it is a child and start transmitting to them advertising or other material which is not appropriate for children? So we have to look at these wider issues. Of course, it's absolutely right that we start with the basic security, and we started when we just had telephone, but we have to build that up into a much more complex environment for internet. But if, as we said at the start, we are to keep a pace of the threats, we have to look at a much wider set of issues.
So how are you doing that? You're the director of Future Networks, etc., digital technology, etc., and digitalization in your portfolio. What kind of things are you thinking about now that will improve
Well,
safety and security?
we have done a lot recently, and of course it's been a huge challenge for the European Parliament sort of to deal with some of the things that we have thrown at them in the last 2 years. But we started with the Cybersecurity Act, and we now have a series of regulatory measures which put in place, first of all, the protections, but also the notification, warning and early response mechanisms, which is often what has to be done. You have the resources at member state level, private and public sector organisations who can, if notified, quickly act to cut off an unsafe website, to intervene with regard to breaches, unsafe computer code or other things which are at the source of whatever is the threat that's identified. But we must continue to ensure that more investment is made in cybersecurity, more training. That's one of the latest proposals that's coming up with regard to cybersecurity skills. And then simply working with those who have a strong market position, who have a strong responsibility as a result to ensure that their mechanisms on which we rely, provided by the private sector, are up to scratch and are at the leading edge of security practice through their coding, through their personnel policies, but also in some cases even placing responsibility on them to monitor the traffic that's carried over their systems or services with an obligation to take down unsafe material.
Okay, on that, it's a nice segue back to you, Karen. And it's a chunky set of issues, isn't there, in there? Because you've had Billy saying that actually there are responsibilities on the provider, the supplier, etc. Just cut to that in terms of what Maria is asking. Is it the right way to think about internet safety? Is the spectrum from buying to talking and speaking and connecting? And what are you doing about it? And then we'll talk about, I think we'll bridge the gap with another question around cybersecurity and cyberbullying, if you like, which is one of the questioners had asked. Go on.
I think we said it all. I mean, the internet is a multitude of actors, and and as a company, we have a responsibility, to protect them. So if we look at the safety of the people, if you look at Gmail, for instance, we block like 99.9% of the phishing, like the spam. If you look at apps, we make sure that the apps that people are going to download are safe. If you look at search, we make sure that it's like what is not safe is removed, or actually there would be a warning if we have a doubt that people could be like stealing the data, this kind of thing. So we have a huge responsibility as a company to make sure that any product which is going to be coming through our platform basically is going to be helping the people. But of course, not only consumer, it's also the companies, or it's also the governments. So, we absolutely need to work together. Like, for instance, with government, we have a huge transparency. Like, we share information about what threats are coming up because we monitor the internet on the threat. And actually, we only as strong as only when we know what are the threats coming so that we can actually work together. So we work with governments about that. Companies, we work with them a lot on uplifting the infrastructure, like putting them on the cloud because it's safer. So when a company is actually protected, they're less, bound to be attacked. So, and then same with entities. When you suddenly have an airport or a hospital that just crash, it's a huge impact. So about how you protect that environment, and that's why, I agree that we need to work together because it's not a simple action. So it can be regulatory action, it's voluntary actions, it's about screening, but we need to get it right because we also need a legal framework and also a technological framework for that.
And do you think at the moment, do you feel we're going in the right direction in terms of the kind of framework, legal framework?
Yes.
I
think there is, there is, I think there is a lot of legislation which have been voted, over the last decade, which are going to that direction. Obviously, more need to be done, including on cybersecurity, which is on the agenda. But yeah, if we tackle, disinformation, if we actually tackle as well cybersecurity, we're on the right path. But of course, we needed a legal framework as well to make sure that we're doing the right thing, as a company as well.
Okay, let's bridge into Nikolai's question. Nikolai argues, and hope you're watching, listening, it's a fairly hollow argument to state that the internet makes it very difficult to catch criminals responsible in high-tech crimes, when the average detection rates for crime in any nation is not exactly encouraging. Is he right to argue that we overestimate traditional crime versus cybercrime? Is it just basically a different kind of crime that has the same volume and the same issues, but on an online platform? So I just wanted to ask PSU that question.
Yeah, I don't think it's right to say that it's at the same volume. We can't in any way, nor would anyone want to minimize or belittle the impact of shall we say, an offline, a physical crime on an individual or even a group in society. But the problem with cybercrime or online crime is that it can have the potential to affect directly so many more people at the same time and can have a serious effect on the economy. We just have to look at the way that cybercrime has been weaponized in terms of the energy systems after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that to see that the scale of the problem in terms of its impact is much worse. So of course member states are constantly improving their law enforcement systems, but together collectively they've recognized that we need to work together on online crime, on cyber crime, in order to minimize the impact, but also because the internet is by nature cross-border, the solutions have to be cross-border as well.
That doesn't feel very hopeful, given the cross-border collaborations we have are very poor.
That's not the case. That's not the case. One area that I worked on, for example, would have been the security of 5G networks, and we drew up, but the member states were in the lead with their experts, and there's a lot of member state competence. They still are in the lead on these issues. We drew up a toolbox of measures to make sure that existing 4G and 5G networks become more secure, and that type of activity is repeated along the line under the member states cooperation group under the Cybersecurity Act. We have ENISA, the European Cybersecurity Agency, but we also have the national, they're so-called the CERTs, but the national experts who will respond in real time to hacking incidents, etc. But they will act together. And there's an awful lot of cooperation which the public don't necessarily see, and in some cases it has to remain, shall we say, unveiled or hidden, because it is working against elements who want to know how they are being tracked or tackled. But it is very comforting that this is the case, but it is also obvious that if you just look at the conclusions of the recent European Council, that the more has to be done in order to address these issues of online cyber security.
And let's face it, it's only going to get worse. When we think about the instances in Sweden, and the fact that it was very, very, very reliably, trolls and bots from Russia, a farm, an army, doing all sorts of nonsense. It's only going to get worse. And I want to come back to both of you in a moment, but I was going to bring you in, Andrea, in terms of your view on this subject and this issue.
I think there is a problem of attribution that we have, not only at the European Union level, but like in general when it comes to cybercrime. Like it's true. I mean, I don't know the stats of that question. I don't know what is the percentage of traditional crime that is actually prosecuted or not. I'm not aware of that figure. But if I'm thinking of the special characteristics of cybercrime, for example, like the issue of attribution and knowing specifically who is behind, that's a very difficult question. And plus, when you were speaking about international collaboration, I agree that here within the EU must be excellent. But if you go and look beyond, it's really, really hard to collaborate with other countries who might be either hosting this criminal. Should they be their identity be known, or that they would be able to just collaborate with the EU in trying to prosecute those crimes. I'm thinking specifically of countries such as India, that is not a signatory of the Budapest Convention, China, and many others.
Sure.
So I think there is plenty of other things that should be done, and I think that those special characteristics makes of cybercrime a special, challenging topic, and it's only going to grow. I mean, Karen mentioned some figures before, and if we could just see the trends as digitalization advances, so do really the threats and our ability to go and counter them should advance as fast.
Okay, so Nikolai, the answer is actually it's more complicated than we think, and clearly it needs a global effort to make this work. But firstly, over to you, Billy. Is your inbox full of stuff from citizens saying, I'm really worried about cybercrime, my security, my identity, and I feel as if cybercrimes are getting out of steam, or is it something that just comes up in general discourse or discussion in your constituency work or here in the Parliament?
I think most of it actually is centred around individuals. So, you get a lot of emails from concerned parents, for example, about their child being bullied, for example, online bullying, exploitation. Targeting of ads, for example, to vulnerable cohorts of people as well is a significant issue that we have to look at as well. But I mean, one of the major problems we will have in the years ahead is when we're trying to police the internet, and reference was made to it by Pierce, you have the civil administrations, police forces, but you also have military interests as well in these issues. And it's going to be very difficult for a lot of countries to ensure that we have a coordinated approach at the very top in terms of addressing cyber security, because the military will be looking at it from one perspective, police forces will be looking at it from another perspective in terms of the theft of money, etc. But also, there is significant infrastructure that is threatened militarily. So from an Irish perspective, for example, we're a neutral country, but there is no doubt the entity that probably has most expertise in this area at the highest level is probably NATO. And yet, we can't access, or we won't be able to access because of the fact that we're neutral. So we will have to do a lot of thinking in that space, not just Ireland, but Europe and globally as well, because we're not all military aligned, but we do have to have a situation where there is a flow of information at the highest level. And then obviously military beyond that won't necessarily share all the information that they do have, which could alleviate some of the pressures on public administrations trying to defend their health services, their banking systems, their electricity grids, their water systems. All of these things are challenges that I see causing difficulties in the years ahead.
I mean, that's really thoughtful. Thank you. Hopefully, if NATO is watching and listening, we'd love to have you on our panel next time and to understand, actually, what are you doing on this subject to protect the citizen on a global level? Karen, your company is global, and it must be kind of head scratching to understand what the world's doing on security, cybercrime, etc. How are you dealing with this? Obviously, you've got that kind of corporate responsibility to do no harm. But say a little bit about what you're doing as a company on this agenda, but also the very specific, the very highly emotional thing of bullying, cyberbullying, which I know that it's something that's close to your heart, but something that the company's thinks it's a very important issue to tackle.
Absolutely. I mean, we have like thousands of engineers which are actually screening, the cyber attacks, and so we really have. We have like a center, in Malaga in Spain, but we have others as well. And the only thing they do is just checking what happens. So, what happened, about 12 years ago, we got a massive attack ourselves, and this is from a government, and this is how we suddenly realized, oh my God, we need to be cyberproof, and so this is how we actually started to create, security by default into all our products. And this is how now we basically monitor, things that are happening. But there is about one significant, cyber attack every day, and it has grown by 50%, I think, over the last year. So, I mean, it's actually quite substantial. And what we see as well is that the attackers, they've actually professionalized. They're much better. They're not like a little blow joke, on the side. I mean, they're very professional. And what we see as well is that the line has blurred between, I would say, the cyber, crime industry and also the people who are like pushed by the state. So the lines are blurred, they get into common interest and they get very sophisticated. So we need to be even more sophisticated than they are. And this is actually the kind of things that we're doing all the time, through our products, and also through the partnership, because we realize that, as we say, cybersecurity is a team sport. We're only as strong as the weakest linked. So we actually need to make sure that all of us, get strong together to constantly fight, the new attack, because they're ever changing. I mean, they're very creative.
Sticking with you for a moment, I want to take in Lubomir. Lubomir asks, it's a long question, but I'm going to cut it down to really the essence of the question is, do we already have all the tools we need to make the internet a safer place?
So I think we need to invent new tools all the time. Mm-hmm. And because, as I said, there is such a creativity of the bad actors to come up with new ideas about how basically to benefit, from the internet. It's really quite important. And so, for instance, we're talking about quantum, and quantum is going to break cybersecurity. So we're already working about, what is going to be the encryption mechanism, which will be post-quantum, for instance. We're looking at new ways, making things on the appliances, maybe like removing the identity of some personal data, using AI more to fight some of the cyber attacks. So minimizing the amount of data which is stored somewhere. So all these kind of things, we have to actually be constantly on the edge, because otherwise we will be fought by the new technologies. So that's some of the things we're basically working on.
Andrea, I want to. You're a policy analyst. Do we have the tools right now?
I tend to agree with what Karen said. I think that we are getting better and we're inventing better tools, but I think that it's as she said it's a team effort. But I would like to take that and just put it in a larger context. It is a team effort between governments. It is a team effort between governments, industry, academics, because they have the time to do more in-depth research, between think tankers as well, that we just try to be in between academia and what is happening in the policy sphere. I think that Europe is doing really, really well. There's a couple of policy proposals that I am very optimistic about. The Cyber Resilience Act, for example, is one of them. But you will never know how good you are until you implement those and you can really get the results, and then you can only keep improving. I think that things are getting more complex, and so we really need like new tools, and we need like new types of cooperation as well if we are to face those challenges.
Okay, I'm almost out of time, so I've got 2 minutes. So I'm going to take a kind of a question which I think comes from a lot of you out there, and I think it's possibly preying on your minds in different ways. So Piers, how concerned should we be about artificial intelligence? If not, why not?
We should be very optimistic about artificial intelligence, but because it is a new dimension, we need to be very wary about the threats or the downside that could come about if it's in the wrong hands. So just as we talked about tools now, this is exactly what Karen was saying, I guess, about having to develop new tools all the time. AI, just as blockchain did, but AI will definitely create a new environment. But it can also be used to protect. It can be used to anticipate threats and vulnerabilities in a way that perhaps isn't as easy. Having to employ thousands of people, which is unfortunately the case for a lot of companies at the moment, can also be supported by AI. But yes, through the ability of creating what are called deep fakes and impersonating an email or even something more three-dimensional, which appears to be a loved one, a close friend, which would get you to respond with something which could give away personal details. That is something which AI could do, and therefore we need to protect against it.
Thank you. Andrea? Briefly.
Briefly, is AI a threat or an opportunity? It can be both.
How worried are you? How worried are you about AI?
Concerned about AI.
Yeah.
I am especially concerned about how feasible humans are, like how easy it is for us to believe in things that are unreal, and how AI has the capacity to fake those things, and how unprepared we are or undertrained we are to actually pick the difference. I think that is specifically what I would be concerned about.
Okay. Karen?
Well, I'm obviously optimistic because it's going to be like honestly the next revolution, for like every industry, every organization, the growth is going to come from there. But I totally agree that we need to make sure that there is no risk attached to it. We have our principle in Google that we will not use it for certain applications which are too risky. And I think we need to make sure that, and there is a legislation discussion at the moment, that the high risk are going to be, well monitored, well organized, because nobody wants it, to be used for like a facial recognition, all over the street, or for defense, for army purposes. So we need to tackle the high risk, but we need to make sure that all the users which are going to be benign and are going to be helpful for the industry and organization to really develop, because I think it's going to be really helpful for growth.
Billy, obviously you knew I was going to come to you last. Legislator, MEP, politician. How worried are you about AI?
Well, look, I think AI in general will be of huge benefit to mankind.
Okay.
But it will need to be regulated with oversight, and that requires human beings.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all. I hope that you haven't been bored. You've been made more cynical, but hopefully we've given you some provocative thoughts, informed you a little bit more about what's going on actually, and given you a better understanding. But it's not the whole story. And as you hear from this discussion of panelists, an august panel of people who I thank very much for being here with us, there's a lot more to happen and do. But what's really clear is that this wonderful thing that was invented many decades ago has been a force for good. It has transformed our lives and potentially our futures, but it's also a force for bad. And what we need to do is be vigilant and make sure that each of us play our part, but importantly, government, private sector and civil society get their acts together to make sure we have a common defence approach to this. Thank you for listening and watching. Tune into our next panel. If you have any questions, or if this has bored you, or you're really irritated by it, or you want an idea that discussed on this panel, email us at allthews@debatingeurope.org. Thank you very much. Stay safe in many ways, and stay net safe. Thank you. Take care. Goodbye.